Welcome to the Revenue Marketing Report powered by Caliber Mind. I'm your host, Camela Thompson, and today I'm thrilled to introduce Kamil Rextin. Kamil, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So been in B2B marketing for about 12-ish years now. Started the agency that I run right now, called 42 Agency, about 5 years ago. Have seen a lot of stuff in B2B marketing. I'm an actual skeptic and a cynic, but I never mean that personally. Excited about to talk about attribution and
I'm so excited because obviously being at Caliber Mind, this topic is so near and dear to my heart. And there's a lot of misconceptions and weird theories thrown around out there. And some people even say it's a made up thing that doesn't really exist.
Yes.
So first, let's just talk about what it is and isn't. I think a lot of people are using attribution without even knowing that they're using attribution.
I mean, you're doing attribution on some level anyway. Even before digital, like people used to run TV ads, they used to do some form of attribution to see if there was a lift in sales in certain geographic areas. You run billboards, you run newspaper ad. You do some level of attribution because otherwise you just don't know if your investment is paying off or not. Even like if you look back to the Dan Kennedy's of the world, they used to like direct mail campaigns, like you mail in a coupon. That's attribution because you can attribute that sale to a specific coupon code that somebody mailed in. So I think it's not something new that just came out of nowhere. I think it's always been around in different shapes or form. It's just that with the cookies and the internet and everything, we got a whole bunch of new data on how people buy and behave online. And I think that created some interesting challenges plus some opportunities. And I think attribution is, in a nutshell, it's just like trying to understand the customer journey and trying to understand like which one of your investments is working, which one is not.
Right. So I hear a lot of people say, I don't need attribution. I'm looking at opportunity source. And it's like, well, that is attribution.
That is attribution.
It's a form of it. So
yeah,
it can be as simple or as complicated as you make it. If you have, let's say, a consumer product that's $5 a pop, you're probably single touch attribution is fine because it's a very quick conversion.
Yeah.
For companies that have really complex sales cycles, they're trying to understand what works to generate pipeline and bookings.
Yeah.
Multi-touch attribution is probably a really good investment.
Yeah.
But let's talk about why people buy it though. So there's a couple different angles I see people come from. One is the more tactically minded. I want to learn what I can do to improve upon what I'm doing today. So which campaign should I invest more in? Which should I scale back on? And then the other big bucket is I want to prove marketing's contribution to the business.
That's a whole kind of worms. Yes.
Yeah. So do you see both of those? What do you see more of? And what are the problems with
Sadly, I see the latter, the credit one. And I think part of the reason is that marketing has a hard time getting a seat at the table. And I have a lot of theories on this. I have a lot of opinions on this. I'm going to try to keep it short, but I think fundamentally marketers are bad at understanding business. Like, I think as marketers, we tend to live sometimes we tend to live on our bubble and we want to do these creative things, but ultimately if you work at a business, your job is to generate revenue and profit. So I think you need to balance that short term versus long term. Like you have to prove that you can drive revenue before you can get a CFO to approve your brand investment that doesn't have a direct line for revenue.
And I think what's interesting, if I could just jump in, what's interesting about that standpoint is it's the opposite in B2C. So B2C marketers, they integrate data, they own the P&L. They are responsible for predicting how much revenue they can come in and how they're going to get there and how much they invest to get there. So they're very, very tuned into the data and they have to be.
Yes.
In B2B, historically, and I think this is going to change and B2B marketers are going to need to change how they think to adapt. But historically, the idea was marketing is a later investment.
Yeah.
We are starting with a concept that's fairly new. And the way we're going to get in the door is brute force, cold calling, and that's how we're going to do it.
Yeah. I think brand is making a comeback in B2B marketing for sure.
Oh, yeah. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of which being like, I saw a recent survey where 43% of B2B buyers don't even want to talk to a salesperson.
Yes. Yes.
That's a bit of a change from we're going to do this by investing in sales and just brute forcing it, right?
Yes. And I think part of the reason is also marketers spend so much time working with other marketers that we forget the big picture. Like we'll debate about SEO versus content versus this versus that. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. Like to an end customer, it doesn't matter if you do like they want to solve their problems. And I think marketers, like especially from what I'm seeing right now, is like we tend to focus too much on marketing to other marketers, not so much to marketing to our customers. And I think that needs to like I can do this podcast because my customers are other marketers because I run a marketing agency. But if I was running a manufacturing business, I would probably want to be more attuned to what manufacturing people are talking about versus debating attribution and all of that. And then, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just think it's so interesting because we're talking about two really distinct problems here that are actually related. So one is B2B marketers are avoiding data.
Yeah.
And they're also avoiding talking to their customers and going with gut. So you can't do any of those things.
Yeah. And I think that's where the credit piece comes in, because oftentimes marketing is tasked with the revenue goal, but then marketing isn't given the ability to influence pipelines and pipeline, because you have to hand off between marketing and sales at one point, and there is only so much marketing to do. So then we have to walk through all this jiu-jitsu around, hey, marketing influence this much revenue, this is why we deserve credit, and this is why we need a seat at the table. I think that's more of an organizational cultural change that needs to happen, where like if you're gonna handcuff marketing at that point, then it's very hard for us to like have that direct line to revenue. But at the same time, I think I saw this discussion is somewhere where somebody was asking, hey, this lead client came in and this customer closed, but the SDR is saying there was this cold call that got them, but we actually ran the marketing ads. And like, I'm like, it shouldn't be a fight over credit. Like ultimately revenue, pipeline is pipeline. Like it doesn't matter where it came from. Like it's always multiple touch points. It's always a mix of channels. And like, you could argue that the marketing ad help convert them. You could argue the cold call convert them, but if you would never know the answer. It's like, it's pointless to have those arguments because there's no right answer.
I 100% agree. So I think one of the biggest challenges is the executive mindset that everything is very linear, one touch, one sale, and that we can track that, when the reality is exactly what you said, which is it takes dozens, if not hundreds of touch points. Some of them are going to be in marketing land, and the rest are going to be with sales, product, channel, whatever you have to leverage. And if we're not making our numbers, that should reflect on marketing. If we are making our numbers, that should also reflect on marketing.
Yes.
However, most executives that I've interacted with, most board people that I've interacted with, that's not something they're willing to embrace right now. They want to look at early indicators and proof points. Like part of this credit thing is pressure, like you mentioned, from the rest of the executive team to prove what you're doing is turning into something else. And I had one CFO say, no, it was the CEO say, I want to know for every dollar I put into marketing by channel and interaction, how many came out?
Yes, and I feel like a blended view is like better. You're hitting that point of diminishing return where like you're not gonna get any new insight if you like we tend to look at it as a blended view. So like they might see you on Facebook, they might convert by SEO, they might convert by direct, they might convert by a partner or referral, but like you don't really know for sure if they didn't see that Facebook ad, what they have converted in the first place. And like trying to have that debate and like cut it up into so many pieces, it becomes like pointless. And I think the other like attribution should be used to understand what is working, what is not working, so we can make smarter decisions and smarter bets versus sales got this credit or marketing got this credit, who did what. Like I think that becomes, and that's where I think attribution gets a bad rep from, because a lot of people use it to justify their existence versus trying to use it to make smarter decisions.
Right. And I think the other thing compounding justifying the existence is the fallacy that if it's digital, you can track it back to the person and the company.
Yes. And
That
it's
is,
going to get harder and harder over time.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm actually, it's good that we have little differing viewpoint on this. I'm actually okay with using multi-touch attribution to represent some sort of contribution.
Aggregate. Yeah. Just an aggregate. Yeah.
Yeah. But as an estimate, it's not perfect.
Yeah.
It will
Yes.
never be perfect. And we're just
There's
trying
no
to
source of
see.
truth. Yeah. There's no perfect data. No
No.
data is perfect. Like
No.
we have to accept that reality. There's no perfect data. There's no first search is better than last search, better Salesforce is better than HubSpot data. Like there's no perfect data, there's no perfect version of truth. And that's where like we started building out some statistical models for some of our customers. And like even that is not perfect, right? Like it's a best guess at a probability that's might have happened.
So now that we've talked through multiple viewpoints on using attribution for credit, where do you see people getting the most bang for their buck when they use attribution in a very smart way?
Making smarter channel, like for example, we very unsophisticated, not multi-touch, but like we've seen this a lot of times where there's like 10% of your AdWords driving 90% of the results, and your spend is wasted on the other 90% of like budget. And that's where you can make a smart decision and say, hey, we've been running these keywords and campaigns for like 6 months. We now know that they're not bringing in enough revenue. Let's trim back and like allocate that budget somewhere else with the architecture sites. Like very basic, very simplistic last touch model, but like it gives us something to go on versus shooting in the dark. Or if you are like we found this with one of our customers, we're running like Facebook ads for enterprise like mid-market software, and they were like, oh, I don't think this Facebook thing works. And then we're like, because it wasn't showing up in the last touch model, but then we looked at it on a more holistic level, and then we saw that Facebook was actually contributing, but it was not like the direct last touch, which is why it was not being captured in the CRM. So I think there's cases there where you can make smarter bets and you can understand what is actually happening versus what the data should be, because there is no perfect source of truth. So like you have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that, and that's how I prefer to use it myself, is if we're only looking at a single point in time, the campaign we're analyzing may not be effective at that single point in time. So there's some tactics we as marketers have to do to build awareness and even get in front of people in the first place. And then there's other tactics that are better at generating interactions with sales. And then there's other ones that help keep a deal moving forward. So I think there's still a place for demand gen funnel. And I think there's absolutely a place for multi-touch attribution. It's just, you need, in my opinion, to have somebody who can translate the insights into next steps.
And that's where I think a lot of the attribution stuff. I've done 3 implementations of Visible. Sorry, don't kick me out. This was before Visible got bought by Marketo. So I've done like 3 implementations, and all 3 cases was like, here's the dashboard, this shows this. And the question was, what do I do with this information? Like, what are the next steps? And like, it's easy to show a pretty dashboard and say, oh, here's our W-shaped model of office data generated, but like, you have to translate that into, okay, this means that we need to allocate more spend to XYZ and reduce spend on XYZ.
Yeah, there needs to be that translation layer. And I think executives need to be more proactive about educating themselves about what's possible and how to communicate with operations to let them know what they need out of it. It's people need to be more honest about what they see and they don't see. I don't see a pattern here. What pattern do you see? Or you mentioned this pattern here. What do you think is contributing to it? Start working better with operations and telling them, this is what I need to make this information useful.
Like when we do quite a bit of RevOps type work, and we always say, what is the output you're looking for? Because the output will define what are the inputs that need to go into. If you don't have an output that you want, then it's very hard to wrangle up the inputs to understand what needs to go in there to produce that output.
Yeah, I mean, the key to utilizing data isn't being good at math. It's
Yeah.
understanding which questions to ask.
Yes. You have to ask smart questions. Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
totally.
Yes.
So we talked about establishing credit. We talked about what attribution is useful for. There's been a really, really big push lately to rely more heavily on self-reported attribution.
I think that's an oxymoron. Like,
I
it's called self-reported attribution. Anyway, sorry. Excuse me.
I love that you jumped there. That was awesome.
It's like a, just
Tell me how you
pains
really feel. Don't hold back.
It just pains me so much.
So the reason why we're saying that is there's a couple of really big issues I see, and I'm sure you see more. But like you said, recency bias is a thing. I can't remember what I had for breakfast. Well,
Yeah, like I have two kids, right? And like I'm like, wait, did they eat lunch today or was that yesterday? Like that happens a lot. I'm like, oh wait, what did we eat yesterday? But did they have lunch? And I think like I remember the time before we had the visibles of the world, and I used to get on calls with people and I'm like, oh, how did you hear about us? I think if you have a low volume, like we're an agency, we need to close like one customer a month. So it's fine to move for me be like, Camila, how did you come across our site? And
Yep.
they can, and the funny thing is a lot of people say SEO and we don't do any SEO. And they come usually to our referral.
Yeah.
So it's like there's recency bias. It's just like it's one input. Like if you are going to use it, take it as a single input, not as a source of truth. Like it's one input that goes into a broader model. And I saw this on LinkedIn. Somebody posted that, oh, our self-reported attribution. I hate that word. How did you hear about us? Says XYZ, and our software shows XYZ. And it just showed like, people hear about them on G2 Cloud, but the software shows it's direct. And I'm like, that's not wrong because the direct is that bucket of people who might be seeing you on G2 and like Googling you afterward. Like that's not fundamentally wrong. So the cookie thing can only track clicks and trackable stuff. That's direct is that whole bucket of things that it's not able to track like that as well.
But what you can do is partner with G2 and get their intent data and know which companies for sure are recent.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there's a lot of ways to go about this. What I like that you pointed out is the recency bias. I think back to your example of did the kids eat today or yesterday? The better question to ask the kids is probably, are you hungry?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Right? So it all depends on how you're framing the question. And this is a free-form text field. It's not scalable is the problem. So if you're dealing in a volume of hopefully hundreds and thousands, it's going to be really hard to parse out the text to get the value out of it. So it is a data point.
Yes.
We stopped doing this a long time ago because those of us who are old enough to remember starting here.
Yes.
There's a reason why we stopped doing it. It's because it's just not scalable.
It was a pain in the ass. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So we're going to go back to needing that translator. I talked about some ways a CMO can coach marketing operations to provide more context that is helpful to them.
Yeah.
What are some things that marketing operations can proactively do to provide more value? I think is the other angle.
I think marketing ops is a lot of times relegated to their own room and they're not brought into the broader business discussions. And I think that's a huge mistake because they are more strategic partners. And if they understand the business goals, they can look at the data and tell you, hey, like, you remember this big campaign we did? Like, here's the data, and I think we should do this. I think a lot of times marketing ops and rev ops is seen as order takers. Hey, we need this field built in Salesforce. Hey, we need this report without having the broader context of why do we need this sale? Like what is a broader business context? And I think it's such an underinvested, underappreciated function in modern marketing orgs, and it just pays me because I did a lot of marketing ops in my days.
Yep.
It's like the critical infrastructure that keeps everything running, but they're not seen as strategic partners. And I think there's a lot of value they can add if they're given the right context.
Yeah. And I think some of like the pivotal moment in my career, thanks to a lot of coaching, was when I realized that instead of being upset about not being included, I can come to the executive and say, here's what you asked for, but here are the things I'm noticing, and here's what I think we should research more to figure out if that's the problem.
Yeah.
When you start delivering insights instead of reports,
yes,
they will start to value you more. Like I had this one guy in sales, I was in sales ops, and he didn't want to talk to me. He just wanted to know if things were working or not.
Yeah.
And he'd ask for reports. The minute I started giving context, he'd disagree with me initially. Like I came up with 4 indicators that somebody was going to quit. And he's like, that's BS. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, I kept being right.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he's like, okay, let's meet every Monday morning for 30 minutes to review the data.
Yes. Yes. Like a perfect example of this kind of thing is like the MQL debate that's going on right now. Like an MQL is just you saying based on these inputs, this lead has a high likelihood to close.
Yep.
But if you make those inputs in a vacuum, then they're worthless. But if you look at enough data points and you make an educated guess, it's a probability that they're likely to close. It's not that MQLs are bad or broken. It just like depends on how you measure them or how you model them. And if you have somebody from marketing ops in that conversation, they can tell you based on the close one data that we have, these are some common denominators across all our close one customers. So this is what should be an input.
Yeah, and I think this comes with experience, but operations has this huge opportunity to add value if they can come to the table and say, hey, I see we're not gating our MQLs. And that is absolutely the right decision to make when you're just starting out as a company and you're trying to prove market product fit.
Yeah.
I think we're at the point where they're getting oversaturated with stuff that's not converting. And here are my recommendations. So marketing ops people out there, don't just come to the table with a problem. If you can come with some suggested solutions, game changer.
I think that's like that advice goes for anybody, right? If you're in content marketing, if you're in product marketing, if you're in demand generation, like solutions over problem. Totally.
And I think the other thing I see out there, and this is more woo-woo, it's just who I am, is there's a lot of stigma with creative types that they're not good at math and you can't be good at math.
Yes.
I think I remember being in meetings where there's always this one executive that would spot something and they would just ask a lot of questions. That is not because they're good at math. They've learned to look for patterns and anomalies.
Yes.
And that has nothing to do with math. So so people can learn these things if they challenge themselves.
100%. You don't need to be good at Excel. Yes.
No, you don't have to. So what are other things that people who want to be that translator and value add person, what kind of things do they look for and can bring to the business that just really make that impact?
I think you need to look outside just your immediate function and try and understand how the business overall runs. So like, let's say go to market, are they freemium, are they enterprise, how do people buy, what are some common objections sales gets, how can we leverage that to create some operational processes to help streamline that? Because there's a lot of stuff that goes on in a business, like you can add a lot of value across the business from your point of view, but you need to understand, you need to put in the effort to understand the business and not just stick to your, I'm the Salesforce guy, I'm just going to stick to Salesforce, but also understand the broader context in which you operate.
It's like how to win friends and influence people. If you're talking to the salesperson, acknowledge how hard their job is. They're paying everybody's checks, payroll. It's coming from them. And you're just here to make things easier. And they'll let you in the door. Like if you approach it that way, it's much easier to be included on sales calls or get those recordings and make a bit of a difference.
100%.
Kamil, thank you so much. It's been a really fun conversation. I knew it would be. I have a lot
of hot takes, so I'm full of them.
I love it. Love a good hot take. So where can people find you online to network and contact you?
I'm really active on Twitter. So find me on Twitter. I'm active on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. We run a newsletter called 42slash.com. You can check that out and we do a lot of stuff there.
You know, I dipped on Twitter a while ago when things were really dramatic, and I'm starting to have some FOMO because I think it's stabilizing. So I may need to get back on there.
Yes. It's where the cool kids hang out.
I don't know, man, but
Not anymore, but yes.
all right,
Elon Musk
folks.
kind of takes us all the way. Yes.
Love it. Okay, so for those of you listening, we'll provide those links in the show notes. If you enjoy the show, please rate, review, subscribe so I can justify to my boss, let me keep doing this kind of thing. And for those of you looking for more great content like this, check out calibermind.com.